Welcome back, everyone. We will continue with the topic of reception, response, and coordination. First subtopic, reception, response, and coordination in animals. And to continue from where I left before, we are to start on transmission of nerve impulse. Of course, we know that nerve impulse is the nerve message that moves along the axon. The process by which nerve impulse moves along the axon is in form of electromagnetic waves. The way waves normally move up and down. So that's the way nerve impulse also moves along the axon. So before we come to the details of how nerve impulse moves along the axon, we'll start off by looking at the axon itself, how it looks like. When a nerve cell is not transmitting nerve impulse, we say it is at resting potential. When a neuron is transmitting nerve impulse, we say it is at action potential. So we have two terms, resting potential and action potential. So, at resting potential, a neuron is at rest. That means it's not transmitting any nerve impulse. At action potential, it is a condition in which a neuron is transmitting nerve impulse. So, at action potential, nerve impulse is being transmitted along a neuron. Resting potential, neuron is not transmitting a nerve impulse, therefore it's at rest. So let's look at each and every condition on its own. We'll start off with resting potential. If I take this diagram to represent an axon or a section of axon, then this is what we have. At resting potential, the outer part is usually positively charged due to high percentage or concentration of sodium ions. Inside the axon, we have potassium ions, which are very few, but with a large percentage of negatively charged ions. So that means at resting potential, we say a neuron or axon is polarized. So at resting potential, an axon or a neuron is polarized, meaning the outer part is positively charged, the inner part inside the axon is negatively charged. The outer part of the axon at resting potential has sodium ions, but the inner part of the axon at resting potential has few potassium ions with a lot of negatively charged ions. Since the potassium ions are few and the negatively charged ions are numerous, we say the inner part is negatively charged while the outer part positively charged. In that condition, we say a neuron at resting potential is polarized. Polarization of the neuron at resting potential or polarization of the axon at resting potential is due to a mechanism known as sodium pump. Sodium pump uses energy from respiration. And of course, we know respiration takes place within the mitochondria. So energy from respiration that takes place within the mitochondria is used by this mechanism, sodium pump, to ensure that any sodium ions that moves into the exoplasm is pumped out. So sodium ions that tend to move inside the axoplasm will be consistently pumped out during resting potential. Pumping out of sodium ions during resting potential ensures that all sodium ions are found on the outer part of the axoplasm, while potassium and negatively charged ions remain inside the axoplasm. Then, at action potential, when a nerve impulse reaches a section of the axon, the axon becomes depolarized. So during action potential, sodium pump ceases to function. The outer part, as it mentioned, positively charged due to high concentration of sodium ions. The inner part, potassium ions, negatively charged. Let me take that this is the section where there is action potential. So at action potential, sodium pump ceases to function. When sodium pump stops to function, then what will happen is positively charged ions will move in, while the negatively charged ions will move out. Again, positively charged ions move in, negatively charged ions move out. So what will happen is we'll have an influx of sodium ions and negatively charged ions will move out. So at action potential, we say a section of the neuron becomes depolarized. Depolarized. It is depolarized because the positively charged ions move in and negatively charged ions move out. That depolarization leads to a creation of a wave kind of movement where the positive ones move in, negative ones move out. Positive ones move in, negative ones move out. So it moves in form of a wave like that. In movement of positively charged ions, out movement of negative. Positive in, negative out. Positive in, negative out. That creates a continuous wave of motion that takes place within the axon. When that wave of motion takes place within the axon, we say the section of the axon where that particular action takes place, we say it is depolarized. Depolarization is due to influx of positively charged ions and out movement of negatively charged ions. So in that case, nerve impulse moves in form of electromagnetic waves. Positive in, negative out. Positive in, negative out. Electromagnetic waves. And once depolarization has taken place and nerve impulse has passed over, depolarization is followed immediately with repolarization. So, if negatively charged ions had moved out and positively charged ions in, we say at this particular condition there is depolarization. So in action potential, there is depolarization. Once action potential has taken place, it has to be followed immediately with repolarization. In repolarization, sodium pump resumes its function. When sodium pump resumes its function, then it means positively charged ions that had moved inside the axoplasm will be pumped out, and negatively charged ions that were out will move in. That means after repolarization, we'll end up with the inner part being positively charged. The inner part being negatively charged and outer part being positively charged. I'll repeat. During action potential, axon or a section of axon where nerve impulse reaches becomes depolarized. In depolarization, sodium pump stops to function. It ceases to function. When sodium pump ceases to function, then it means sodium ions or positively charged ions will move in, while negatively charged ions will move out. Positively charged ions moving in, negatively charged ions moving out. That means during action potential, when the neuron or a section of the axon is depolarized, the outer part will become negatively charged, the inner part positively charged. In that condition, we say the neuron or section of the neuron is depolarized. Action potential. After action potential, we've mentioned that there will be repolarization. In repolarization, sodium pump resumes its function. When sodium pump resumes its function, then what will happen is its activity will make positively charged ions to be pumped out and positively charged ions to move in. Positively charged ions will move out, negatively charged ions will move in. That process will lead to repolarization of the section of the neuron. That means the section of the neuron that had experienced depolarization will be repolarized, meaning it gets back to its original state. The original state was the outer part positively charged, the inner part negatively charged. Fine, so we've looked at resting potential, action potential, and repolarization of the section of the neuron once nerve impulse has passed. Repolarization is important because it prepares the neuron for conduction of the next wave of impulse. That means after depolarization has taken place, it's immediately followed by repolarization. Repolarization gets the neuron back to its original state where the outer part was positively charged, the inner part negatively charged. Repolarization is important because it prepares the neuron for next transmission of nerve impulse. That means one nerve impulse is not supposed to mix with the next nerve impulse, but instead, once a particular nerve impulse has been conducted, repolarization takes place, and that prepares the neuron for the next activity of nerve impulse transmission. Then, next thing that we look into is synapse or neurojunction. We've seen that nerve impulse moves along a neuron in form of electromagnetic waves. But the other time, when we looked at the spinal cord, we saw that terminal dendrites of sensory neuron, the dendrites of intermediate neuron, and dendrites of motor neuron were never in contact with each other, but instead there were gaps between them. As a reminder, if this is the section of the spinal cord, sensory neuron over there, its dendrites, so the neuron, the upper part here is sensory neuron, intermediate neuron, motor neuron. At the terminal end of each and every neuron, there are some swollen sections. These swollen terminal ends of dendrites are known as synaptic knobs. Synaptic knobs. So, at the terminal ends of dendrites, there are some swollen sections. Those swollen sections are the ones that we call synaptic knobs. The junction, the space in between synaptic knobs, is what we call synapse or neurojunction. So a neurojunction simply means a space in between synaptic knobs of two different neurons. So the gap in between there is what we call synapse or neurojunction. So next thing that we want to look into is how nerve impulse is usually transmitted across a synapse. So transmission of nerve impulse across synapse. The synapse, you also say, is known as neurojunction. I'll draw a diagram to represent a synapse. Fine. In this diagram, we have two knobs. The knobs of adjacent neurons, maybe motor neuron and intermediate neuron, or knobs of sensory neuron and intermediate neuron. Let's assume nerve impulse is coming from this direction. That's moving from left-hand side to right-hand side. If nerve impulse is moving from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, then this knob here is known as presynaptic knob. The other knob, postsynaptic knob. The space in between presynaptic knob and postsynaptic knob is known as synaptic cleft. Then the synaptic cleft. Inside presynaptic knob, we do have mitochondria. As well as some circular structures known as synaptic vesicles. So mitochondrion, synaptic vesicle, the mitochondria are to provide energy within presynaptic knob. Synaptic vesicles contain a chemical transmitter substance known as acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is called a neurotransmitter chemical substance. It's the one that will transmit nerve impulse across synaptic cleft from presynaptic knob to postsynaptic knob. The membrane on presynaptic knob is known as presynaptic membrane. So this is presynaptic membrane. This other one, postsynaptic membrane. Inside the synaptic cleft, there is an enzyme known as choline esterase. Choline esterase enzyme. This enzyme is found inside synaptic cleft. So in summary, a point where the terminal ends of dendrites of two different neurons come into close contact with one another, we call that synapse. The swollen terminal ends of the dendrites are called knobs. The swollen terminal ends of dendrites, knobs. If it is a knob of the neuron that brings in impulse to the cleft or to the synapse, we call it presynaptic knob. If it is the knob of a neuron that transmits nerve impulse away from the synapse, we call it postsynaptic knob. Inside presynaptic knob, we have mitochondria, which are organelles that will provide energy. Inside the same presynaptic knob, we have circular structures known as synaptic vesicles. If it's one, synaptic vesicle. Inside synaptic vesicles, there is a chemical substance known as acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter substance. When you say acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter substance, what that means is it is the chemical substance that will transmit nerve impulse across synaptic cleft from one neuron to the next adjacent neuron. Inside the space between the two synaptic knobs, this space here is known as synaptic cleft. Inside synaptic cleft, we have an enzyme known as choline esterase enzyme. Then how does nerve impulse move across the synapse or synaptic cleft? When nerve impulse reaches presynaptic knob, one of the synaptic vesicles becomes activated. The activated synaptic vesicle will then move and attach itself onto the wall of presynaptic membrane. So if I take this synaptic vesicle as the one that has been activated, it will then move and then attach itself onto presynaptic membrane. Then this is what will happen. The stimulated synaptic vesicle will move and then attach itself onto presynaptic membrane. After attaching itself onto the presynaptic membrane, it then ruptures, it bursts. When it ruptures, it releases acetylcholine, the chemical substance within it, into the synaptic cleft. So acetylcholine, which was within synaptic vesicle, once released, it will flow within synaptic cleft and finally attach itself onto the postsynaptic membrane here. Once acetylcholine attaches itself onto postsynaptic membrane, it stimulates postsynaptic membrane and therefore make it to undergo depolarization. Depolarization in the sense that The outer part, which is positively charged, will turn out to be negative. That means positively charged ions on the outer part will enter into the postsynaptic knob. The negatively charged ions inside postsynaptic knob will move out. So positives move in, negatively charged ions move out. That means acetylcholine brings about depolarization of postsynaptic membrane. Depolarization of postsynaptic membrane generates a nerve impulse, which is in form of waves. The generated nerve impulse will move across postsynaptic knob, enter into the axon, and then transmitted along the axon of the adjacent neuron. So in simple terms, the nerve impulse within presynaptic knob has brought about activation of one of the synaptic vesicles, which has moved and attached itself onto presynaptic membrane. After the attachment of one of the synaptic vesicles onto the presynaptic membrane, the synaptic vesicle ruptures. As we had said before, synaptic vesicle contains a chemical substance called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter substance, which is said is a chemical substance that will transmit nerve impulse across synaptic cleft. So this is the acetylcholine moving across the cleft from presynaptic knob across the cleft to postsynaptic knob. At the postsynaptic knob, it brings about depolarization of postsynaptic membrane, and that depolarization generates a nerve impulse, which then moves across the postsynaptic knob and then enters into the axon of the adjacent neuron, and the nerve impulse moves. Once nerve impulse has been passed over to the adjacent neuron, which has postsynaptic knob, the enzyme called choline esterase within synaptic cleft will then break down acetylcholine into two chemical compounds. Acetylcholine will be broken down into acetic acid, also known as ethanoic acid, and choline. Choline is a protein. Acetic acid is an alkanoic acid, organic acid. Chemical breakdown of acetylcholine by choline esterase enzyme is important because it stops continuous activation of postsynaptic membrane. Once acetylcholine has been broken down into acetic acid and choline, then activation of postsynaptic membrane stops. At the same time, the two chemical substances formed from acetylcholine, that is choline and acetic acid, will be taken back into presynaptic knob, where energy from mitochondria will be used to combine acetic acid and choline to form another acetylcholine. So this enzyme choline esterase will break down acetylcholine into choline and acetic acid. Then these two compounds, choline and acetic acid, will be taken back into presynaptic knob. Then we brought back here. Once within presynaptic knob, choline and acetic acid will be joined together using energy from mitochondria to form acetylcholine. The acetylcholine formed will then be incorporated into another synaptic vesicle, which will now be ready for transmission of the next impulse. Remember the significance of breaking down acetylcholine by choline esterase enzyme is to stop continuous activation of postsynaptic membrane. This prepares postsynaptic membrane and presynaptic membrane for transmission of the next nerve impulse. And that's how nerve impulse is usually transmitted across a synapse. Fine, so we've learned that choline esterase is normally found inside synaptic cleft. Its function is chemical breakdown of acetylcholine once it has transmitted nerve impulse across synaptic cleft. It's broken down, acetylcholine is broken down into choline and acetic acid. Acetic acid is an ethanoic acid or organic acid. The two compounds formed are incorporated back into presynaptic knob, where energy from mitochondria is used to join the two to form acetylcholine, which is then incorporated into another synaptic vesicle, which will then be ready for transmission of the next nerve impulse. So that's all about transmission of nerve impulse across synaptic cleft. So next subtopic will involve the next type of coordination within the human body. So by winding up with the transmission across a synapse or synaptic cleft, we are done with nervous communication. At the introductory part of the topic, we mentioned that we do have two types of communication systems within the human body. The two main types of communication systems within the human body that we talked about at the introductory part of the topic were nervous communication and endocrine communication, simply nervous system and endocrine system. We are done with nervous system, and you've seen that a neuron is the basic functional unit of nervous system. Now I want to look at endocrine system. Endocrine system is also known as hormonal system of communication. It's referred to as hormonal system of communication because here hormones are the chemical transmitter substances. In nervous communication, we've seen that acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter chemical substance. It's the chemical substance that makes nerve impulse to move across from one neuron to the next neuron. In endocrine system, hormones are the chemical transmitter substances that ensures that a particular nerve, a particular message is passed over from one part of the body to another. That means it's hormones that will bring about physiological changes within the body. Hormonal system of communication or endocrine system is a slow system of communication compared to nervous system. It takes a long time for a particular change or the desired change to be realized. But for nervous system, it takes a very short time, in fact, a split of a second for nerve response to be realized. But in hormonal system or endocrine system, it takes a long time. Then what are endocrine glands? Endocrine glands are ductless glands that are found in various parts of the bodies of human beings. These glands produce and secrete hormones. The hormones that are secreted are chemical in nature and usually move by blood. So that means hormones are usually transported by blood from one part of the body where they're secreted to another part of the body where they bring about physiological changes. We do have many endocrine glands. For example, within the brain we have pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is the one that secretes other hormones that control secretion of hormones from different glands. That's why yesterday we talked about pituitary gland being the master endocrine gland. For example, pituitary gland can secrete thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone, once secreted by pituitary gland, it will move by blood to the thyroid gland. Within the thyroid gland, thyroid stimulating hormone will stimulate the thyroid gland, which will respond by secreting thyroxine hormone. Thyroxine hormone will then move by blood to various parts of the body where it will bring about the desired physiological changes. For example, an increased rate of respiration. So, some of the endocrine glands that we have are, we have pituitary gland, the brain, we have thyroid gland, neck region, we have adrenal glands, above the kidneys, we have testes of the males, which are located inside the scrotum. Testes do secrete testosterone hormone. Then we have the ovaries of females, which secrete estrogen hormone. So, the ovaries are located on the lower part of the abdomen of the female reproductive system. Testes they're found inside the scrotum, which hangs outside the body of the males. So these are just but some of the endocrine glands. Said pituitary gland, the brain, secretes thyroid stimulating hormone and other different types of hormones as well. Thyroid gland, found in the neck region, it secretes thyroxine hormone. Adrenal glands, the kidneys are here. So above each kidney, this is the diagram of the kidney. Above each kidney we have adrenal glands. The adrenal glands secrete adrenaline hormone. Testes of males secrete testosterone hormone. That is the hormone that brings about changes in male secondary sexual characteristics like enlargement of muscles, deepening of the voice. It initiates the process of spermatogenesis, etc. Ovaries. The ovaries of females are also endocrine in nature because they secrete, one example of the hormone, estrogen hormone. Estrogen hormone is the hormone that brings about feminine secondary sexual characteristics like widening of the hips. It brings about enlargement of breasts. Estrogen hormone also brings about oogenesis, maturation of the ova within the ovaries. So there is a diagram of the male and female body that shows exact locations of various types of endocrine glands. Then we will look at some of the endocrine glands, their secretions and effects of the secretions. The secretions in this case, we are talking about hormones. Fine, so the hormones that we'll talk about here, one will be thyroxine hormone. Thyroxine hormone. Thyroxine hormone is a hormone that is normally secreted from thyroid gland. Thyroid gland in the neck region. Thyroxine hormone is usually secreted under the influence of thyroid stimulating hormone, in bracket TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, from pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. So he said pituitary gland is a ductless gland that is found within the brain. Pituitary gland secretes hormones that control other ductless glands in terms of quantity and time of secretion of various hormones. That's why he said pituitary gland is the master endocrine gland. It controls the other endocrine glands. Like for this case, we have thyroxine hormone, which is a hormone that is secreted by the thyroid gland located in the neck region. For thyroid gland to secrete thyroxine hormone, it has to be stimulated by thyroid stimulating hormone, which is secreted by pituitary gland. So once pituitary gland has secreted thyroid stimulating hormone will then move by blood to the neck region where we have the thyroid gland. It will then stimulate thyroid gland, which will respond by secreting thyroxine hormone. What is the function or significance of thyroxine hormone? Thyroxine hormone is a hormone that increases the rate of metabolism within the body. What that means is thyroxine hormone will lead to increased rate of respiration. When the rate of respiration is fast, then it means a lot of energy will be produced. The energy produced, if it's for a young child, it will be used in cell divisions. When the cells divide, they increase in number. Increase in number of cells within the body is what we refer to as growth. Permanent quantitative increase in size of an organism brought about by increase in number of cells, brought about by cell division. So thyroxine hormone helps by increasing the rate of metabolism within the body. Apart from that, when thyroxine hormone works in collaboration with somatotrophin hormone or growth hormone, it brings about proper growth and development in young children. So, thyroxine hormone works in collaboration with growth hormone, somatotrophin, thereby bringing about normal growth and development in young children. That means, in the absence of thyroxine hormone, then there will be problems that a child will face in terms of his or her growth and development. We will look at effects of deficiency of thyroxine hormone and as well as excessive or excess production of thyroxine hormone. So we look at effects of hyperthyroidism and effects of hypothyroidism brought about by thyroxine hormone. So that will be for our next lesson. Otherwise, thank you.